Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 5, Episode 6, Urgent Care. In this episode, Colin Robinson is too interesting, which means that he cannot feed, and he is really feeling a way about this. Meanwhile, Nadja now knows that Guillermo has been turned, and I am blown away. I didn't expect everybody to find out before Nandor. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Max for commissioning this episode. You guys, this was a great episode. I loved this. I feel like this may go in some of my top 5 episodes of the show. There were so many elements here that were so excellent. So we start off this episode with Laszlo going to get Guillermo, and they're making sure that Nandor is out of the way and that he is going to, what is it that Laszlo says? He's shaking hands with Rosie Palmer and her 5 milkmaids, which is his way of saying that he's jerking off Rosie Palm. But Rosie Palmer and her 5 milkmaids, I am putting that in my back pocket. That's I'm saying that at some point. It's too weird and creepy. I love it. So it turns out that he's doing these experiments, and he has made these frogs that he injected with Guillermo's blood. I don't even remember exactly how this works. He says, I've discovered something wonderful with the frogs. Yeah, that I injected with his blood. So, first of all, they all have Guillermo's hair, which is truly hysterical. But they can also fly. And I love that he throws them off the balcony. And Guillermo has a moment of just no, what are you doing? Because he just cares about these little froggies, which is truly funny, considering that he watches people get murdered all the time. But, these frogs can fly, which means that Guillermo can fly. That is Laszlo's theory here. And I have to agree. That made sense to me. So he breaks off the end of the balcony banister, and he just basically goes down on the floor and coaxes Guillermo. I thought for sure Laszlo was going to push him, and I was sort of pleasantly surprised that he lets Guillermo do this at his own pace. So yeah, Guillermo does this interesting little drop where he's still got a toe on the balcony, but otherwise he has completely tipped forward. And there was something about that really resonated. I was like, oh my God, if I was testing out whether I could fly, I think I would probably do that exact same thing. That one little toe still being there would give the illusion of oh, I can do it. I can get myself back onto that landing if I need to, even though it absolutely does nothing of the sort. But it would let me feel a little bit more in control for a second. And then he hears Nandor yelling, and he's floating in midair on his stomach. And it causes him to lose his concentration, panic, whatever it is, and he falls flat on his face from 10 feet in the air and twists his ankle pretty badly. We see it later on, and that shit is turned all the way around. And it takes quite a while before anybody pays him the least bit of attention, because Colin Robinson shows up and is a little bit too interesting. So first thing is he comes in and says, "What's up, boners?" And Colin has a black eye. So immediately, despite the fact that Guillermo was laying on the floor with a completely like twisted around ankle, immediately it's Colin who's like, everybody's going, what happened to you? What's going on? Someone's had an interesting evening. And he's asking what happened to his foot. And they say, who gives a fuck? And they're like, did you get kicked by a donkey? Did you get in a fight? And this is when he says, this is the problem. Every time I go to drain someone, they see my black eye and want to know what happened. All of a sudden, I'm too goddamn interesting to drain anyone. And when Nandor kind of calls him and is like, really? You're so interesting? And he says the exact same thing happened when I came back from Vietnam. They're all impressed, thinking that he went as a soldier. And it takes a minute before he is able to straighten out that that's not what it was. 6 years ago, I took a cycling trip with back roads. On the third day, we found a dead body in a tree with an ox's asshole around its neck like a necklace. And they're like, how did that happen? Some poor farmer and his ox must have stepped on a decommissioned landmine and he blew him up into the tree and the ox's asshole must have just landed on his head. And Laszlo, I wasn't expecting that ending. It's the black eye that makes my stories too interesting. Do you think your black eye also has an interesting story? Unfortunately, yes, it's fucking remarkable. Laszlo, but this is Colin Robinson. I mean, he can't have any more fascinating stories in him. And Colin says, gee, you tell me? A 5-pound frozen block of shit and piss falls off a plane, landing on a 308 Ferrari and blowing the side view mirror right into my kisser. To which Laszlo says, well, fuck my old boots, son of a bitch. Fuck my old boots. We've got Rosie Palmer and her 5 milkmaids, and fuck my old boots. It's all winners. It's all good. These are great. Fuck my old boots? What? What even is that? It works. I don't know why. It just does, though. So, yeah, going also into the arsenal. So, yeah, everybody, all of this is happening while Guillermo is literally on the floor, moaning and crying. And this means that nobody wants to bring Guillermo to the emergency room. Nandor says, I bought him new trousers a year ago. It's your turn. And Nadja is like, fine, whatever. It doesn't matter. To me, he is his familiar. End of story. I don't know how it's your turn. Why is it anybody's turn? But I guess that he does stuff for all of them around the house. So it's just, I suppose. So Nadja, I love the way that they have her just pick him up. Like it's really easy to do. And when she's walking around with him, you can see his foot like dangling. And she asks Laszlo, why are all these hairy frogs zooming around? And he says, the only hairy frog I'm interested in, darling, is the one between your legs. The way that he says it, and then she says it's not just a frog, it's the whole swamp. Oh, that was just awful. Truly, truly awful. Oh my God. So anyway, this is how it ends with like him trying to find the frogs. But then we jump over to this like weird apparatus that Laszlo has concocted that is meant to take energy out of Nandor and pour it into Colin Robinson. Later on, this actually does get used, but at the moment, Nandor's asking if it's going to hurt, and when Laszlo says pain like you've never known, he's like, hey, well, no, then, what if we just, tried to do the original thing and cover up your black eye with makeup and make you boring again? So that's what they attempt to do. And they go out, and Colin keeps accidentally being interesting. You guys, this is my favorite subplot. Him being too interesting. I love all of the things about this. Him being really boring is a great joke, and the ways that they're able to like get that joke across in multiple ways is always interesting to watch, because a joke about how boring someone is, that can go badly really easily if you don't have enough imagination about it. The specificity often is what makes it so funny. Like, one of my favorite characters for whom this was like a recurring joke was Captain Holt of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, R.I.P. But he was supposed to be somebody who was so straight-laced and like conservative in the way he lived his life that you would get these amazing little like lines. At one point he gets food poisoning and he's talking to Amy the next day and he says, "I'm feeling much better today. This morning I had dry toast." And she says, "Oh, that's a good idea. Something bland." And he says, "That's my favorite breakfast." Or at one point asking, like, somebody says, "Do you want to go get lunch with me?" And he says, "Oh, no, thank you. I eat this like, beige food bar that contains all the vitamins and nutrients necessary to the human animal. It's flavorless. I love them." And like that kind of thing, I feel like works really, really well. The thing is, there is something about doing things in that kind of boring way that is in itself unusual and interesting. So Colin Robinson has to be a particular type of boring that the jokes can get a little repetitive, because it's not just he's boring. It's also a kind of like basic Midwest quality to him that, you know, it's like a bit redundant after a while. And this is such a great way of doing it, not just because it's, oh, we're going to do the opposite. I always love when we do that with characters. Don't get me wrong. Pretty much any time that you do like, oh, they're going to act very unlike themselves, or they're going to get results that are the opposite of what they normally get, or they're going to get bonked on the head and act like a completely different person. I love that shit. So always down for it. But what I really liked about this is how completely crucial to his life it is that he be boring. This isn't just like, I am having an annoying day because everybody wants to talk to me. It's like, I'm literally starving to death. And so my behavior is getting more and more erratic because I am starting to lose like the strength to stand. And that combined with obviously the writers having a super fun time figuring out how they're going to make Colin interesting, coming up with these wild stories, which feel just weird enough that I'm like, did they read about that somewhere? Did they literally just make that up? Or, because it's so specific, I'm like, is that something that happened to somebody? And eventually getting picked up by what's his face TV star whose name I never remember. I just think they must have been having a really, really good time with this. So we go over to Nadja pushing this shopping cart with Guillermo in it. And Guillermo is so certain that they're going to figure out that he is a vampire if he goes into an emergency room, that he has to get out of this somehow. And so he keeps like attempting to try and get out of the shopping cart. And honestly, eventually it comes out that he's like healing quite rapidly. And that was sort of what I was waiting for. I was starting to be like, is it going to turn out that by the time he gets seen, there's not a broken ankle anymore? Because the bit is he has a lot of vampire powers, but they're setting in so slowly, it's hard to tell. And I was kind of thinking that part of the joke might be how long the waiting room line is. That, you know, he was waiting to get in for 6 hours or something. And thus he was able to heal before getting in because the line is so absurdly long in whatever New York neighborhood they're in. Oh, that's right. They're in Staten Island. So it turns out it's not any of that, because he is brought to a completely different emergency room. And it turns out that it's familiar urgent care, which is even worse news for him, because if it were the case that he was in a regular hospital, they would see some weird shit and be like, what's up with this guy? But they wouldn't be able to clock exactly what was happening. If he's going somewhere where they're vampires and they know, they're going to be able to tell. Like, there's just no doubt about that. And the way that she has to go, like, right through the wall, she mesmerizes the entire waiting room by saying it's just like a Doberman with a floppy tail, which honestly, she says that to keep them from being interested, but I feel like the worst possible thing you can do when you're trying to keep people from caring is bring a dog into the equation, especially like an injured dog. Are you kidding? Everybody's going to pay attention. They're all going to want to know. Like, to me, that just seemed like you're doing the wrong thing there. However, she looks like she's going into a wall. And of course, with his injured ankle already, he's freaking out. But the wall, it turns out, is an illusion. And they go right through to a doctor who is advising this one particular vampire to put her familiar down, because even though she's just got a cold, what has she got? How many years she have left even? You know, barely any. She's almost like 40 years old, something like that. And she talks about her familiar to Nadja in a later scene about how, like, it's cute to think about her human going over the Rainbow Bridge and meeting all of her friends to have spaghetti. I know that these sorts of jokes are kind of played out, like the jokes about how if we, like, recontextualize human stuff, it can sound weird and silly. But I do really, really enjoy anytime we get the vampires who are so old they barely remember what it's like to be a person anymore. So it's just like the connection is not there. It is genuinely hilarious to me. I really want to know, though, this vampire has a, like, you know, weird forehead in the sort of Buffyverse vampire style. And we've seen this before. There are vampires in this universe who look like fucking vampires out of TV shows. And I want to know what the difference is. This is a piece of lore that I'd be very down for, because, you know, the Baron, I was accepting that he just looked like he did because that's how old he was. And, like, now that he's been brought back to his former glory, he pretty much just looks the same, except younger and hydrated. He's got the same look mostly. Extremely thin, gaunt, you know, that kind of, like, aristocratic carriage, but still fundamentally he looks the same, really. There was just a little crease between his brows and, like, more prominent brow bones. And I want to know what happens to make vampires who look like straight up demons in the face. Is this also a product of age? If they look like that, is that a signal that they are an even older vampire than average? Does that just happen over time? How long does it take? Does it happen, like, because you were closer to death than somebody else? Is it somehow a choice that you can let yourself look this way and choose it? Like, I just really am curious about it, because it's something I've noticed a few times, is how different some of them can look. So this is when we jump over to Colin Robinson, who is walking into the street, and he is having such a hard time because his energy is so low that he approaches this couple trying to bore them with some talk about the origins of the doggy bag. And he's talking about this, and first of all, he's approaching them in a weird way that isn't boring. Just on the street, yelling at them. So the boring part, already I'm sort of like, I feel like this isn't the approach you want, bro, because they are going to be fascinated at the weirdness of some random man trying to trivia them on the sidewalk. Like, even if it's a boring fact, it's the circumstances that make it sort of like, wait, what's happening? But then he gets his foot run over, which draws the attention of everybody, and a bunch of people begin to film him. And he winds up on TikTok as the music Jump Around plays because he's hopping on one foot. And everybody is just filming him, but nobody is offering to help or do anything. And eventually a woman is like, "Are you okay?" But she doesn't really help. The dude who ran over him has pumped the brakes and has gone in reverse. And it turns out that it's this actor, John Slattery. Thank you to the subtitles. So, of course, also super interesting. Everybody's like, it's like a movie star. Although, I don't know what movies he's in. He's been in some. I think he plays... Oh, actually, he plays fucking Iron Man's dad in, like, flashbacks and video that he does, I think. But that's the only thing I really remember. But yeah, this dude being the one who did it, and he's coming back and apologizing and offering to, like, drive him to the emergency room. You don't get better footage than this when you're just sitting on a regular fucking, like, having tacos at a picnic table out in the street. And thus, Colin is like, I need to get away from this guy. He's too interesting. This is going to fuck me up. But not Guillermo, Nandor says he owes you a debt and you're going to be alone in the car with him. Go in there and drain him. Figure it out. So he gets in the car. I love when he says, because somebody says John Slattery, one of the greats, and Colin says he's not one of the greats, he's a reckless driver. Somebody yells back at him, "You're a reckless walker," which I thought was very funny, honestly. So, oh my God, you guys, when I said that the Doberman thing didn't work, I didn't even clock the fact that they were in a veterinary office. How did I miss this? I think I was so, like, still stuck on John Slattery that I didn't notice. There's a sign outside that says, and there are literally people in the waiting room with dogs in their laps. Holy shit. I cannot believe that I missed this. I am really very, very embarrassed at this moment. So, yeah, John Slattery, as it turns out, not a great person to try and feed off, evidently. So the first thing that Colin tries is kind of like poking at him about the fact that he's older. Do you find it difficult being an older actor, having to memorize lines, especially when you've been drinking? Slattery, that's an Irish name, right? And he says, say that last part again. And Colin is excited. He thinks, I can't believe you just said that. Are you gonna say that to me again? He's like, oh, I'm getting under this guy's skin. Perfect. Now I'm about to feed. And he says, do you want me to re-say, is Slattery an Irish name? I mean, I personally don't mind the Irish, but I just don't like it when they try to sound intelligent. And Slattery says, wow. And there's a moment where you can't tell. It seems like he's pissed. And then he says, I could listen to you talk for hours. Not what you're saying, but to that accent. It's just so specific. Where are you from? Upper Midwest, Wisconsin? But not Eastern Wisconsin. That would have more of a Germanic influence. Am I right? And I love this so much. You guys, I am certain I'm not the only one who has been around actors. And it was not as much of a thing when I was in high school. Even though I went to like a performing arts, well, it was a boarding arts school. But when I got to Carnegie Mellon, it was fascinating to me to listen into the homework that the actors were given because they had to study accents. And there's a very particular kind of like, alphabet with the phonetics that they use to write out certain accents so that you can learn them by reading them phonetically first. And it's not just about your ear for it. It's mesmerizing the particular alphabet that's used to spell these out when the certain language is the accent you're doing, which I found riveting. I just thought that was so interesting. But then this kind of thing where they stop people and ask them to repeat things and imitate them and try to get the sound down. And I fucking find myself doing this too. It's so fun and difficult and weird. It's like the kind of thing that, and you'll have these weird like preconceptions as well about what somebody's going to sound like. So then when they come out and they have a certain sound to their voice, if it's not what you expected, it's extra like, wow, really? Today, I was talking to Owen about this goofy example, but I was looking for a new toaster oven, and there was like a video for one. And, you know, usually in a video for like an appliance, it'll be like, Breville's 6-in-1 toaster oven can toast and broil and air fry all in one device. And it's like this very sort of generic sounding woman, often a woman when it's for like a domestic thing. And it's often like as average American an accent as you can do. And so this woman steps onto the screen and I'm expecting this voice to come out of her mouth. And she goes, the Breville all-in-one cooker. And she's got this like really broad Australian accent. And I had a moment of just like having to stop myself from laughing because it wasn't that the accent itself is funny. I have like a million Australian friends. It was how completely unexpected it was. I really thought that I knew exactly what I was going to get in this ad, and then it wasn't. And so anyway, this bit with him becoming obsessed with Colin's accent. Oh my God, y'all. It's so boring on our end to listen to. And he keeps like talking about, he brings up the movie Spotlight about the Boston Globe reporters who uncovered the sexual abuse cover-up in the Catholic Church. Yeah, exactly. No, never seen it. And yeah, he describes this character and who he was and what kind of Boston, like he was from the upper crust. And so he wouldn't have this type of accent. He'd have another one. And essentially the two of them are like being drained by John Slattery. That's pretty much what's happening. And as for Nandor, he tries to chime into this conversation at one point. And Slattery says, yeah, thanks, but I was talking to him. So he is so interested in Colin Robinson. Nandor has a bizarre accent that's like, not even, like, I don't even know if it's a real, like, what's going on there. And Slattery completely does not notice it. Doesn't care about it. It's this goofy Midwest one that he's like zeroed in on. What a stupid joke. But yeah. Oh my God, here it is. It's kind of nice to think of Kathy on that Rainbow Ridge doing stuff with her familiar friends, having spaghetti or whatever it is they're dreaming of doing. Nadja looking at the camera. She's in a better place, and then I wish I was. So this is when the doctor comes out and tells her Guillermo's ankle is healing up nicely, which is very unusual. So just to be safe, I say we put him down. He could break that ankle again, but he could break the other ankle, or he could just bitch a lot. And honestly, Nadja says, I think we're just going to take him home, but I could not help but be surprised because, or he could just bitch a lot, I felt like would really resonate with her as, yeah. And then he says one more thing. The results of that blood work came back and they're very, very odd. I'm just going to have it retested. I promise it won't take long and that we will get you out of here before sunrise. So Nadja at this point thinks that those results are coming out weird because of his relationship to Van Helsing, which makes sense. And he, like the concern there is that, you know, they're using him as sort of a bodyguard at this point. He tries to say it's like still officially on the books that way, even though it's kind of not in practice what's happening anymore. But I appreciated her being concerned enough to be like, all right, you know what? We got to get him out of here before they're able to do that testing over again. So she decides to go back there and take matters into her own hands. Oh my God, I forgot about Colin. Are you taking us to Brooklyn? And then he's imitating that. I love that they're just going like this long way around. Oh my God, can you let us out right here, please? You also have an interesting pauses in your speech. I can't tell if they're regional or uniquely you or... Oh my God, this guy. And if this is when Colin's like, all right, fuck this. And they just open the doors and roll out of the car. And thankfully, we've got the camera guys behind them filming, and they're the ones that like pick them up and bring them home. But by the time they get home, Colin's like almost dead. And Laszlo winds up having to do the thing where he hooks them up and drains life out of Nandor, which very nearly kills Nandor. But we will get there. So let's jump into the room where Guillermo's being held. There's so much blood on the walls and stuff. And I love Guillermo saying, they gave me some relax and it's making me feel very medicine. And Nadja says, all right, well, they're testing your blood and they're going to find out about your Van Helsing blood or whatever, so we got to get you out of here. And Guillermo tries to tell her that he loves her, and she just slaps him across the face, to which he says, you're a crazy bitch, but I still love you. Collins, I love him, but he's like a little boring, Mitch. He's like LBB, but then, you know, I love Nandor because he's like queen bitch. And then he sees the doctor and he says, who's that bitch? Nadja tells the doctor that Guillermo is back to a red, shiny, fresh apple. I feel like I know why she thinks that's a good thing, but it does not sound good. It feels like he's very swollen and red. So this is when the doctor says, he's not going home. Who turned him? According to our tests, it's the early stages, but he is well on his way. And he says, if you're regretting turning him, because if you are, you should have thought of that before you did it. Oh my God. So she takes a while to convince. And he says, science does not lie. It must be recent because he's still transforming. And she's just like, this doesn't make any sense because nobody in our house would do it. And this dude says, well, then I'm going to put him down. I am willing to accept that he was just going to do this because he does this to all human beings for reasons, but I thought that like sometimes people do turn their familiars. Is this proof that there is never an intention to turn familiars? Because it feels like if this reaction to a familiar getting turned is the usual reaction of who the fuck did this, that seems like it never is done. We just don't do this. And it was an accepted thing. I thought we were all on the same page. You don't turn your familiars. Oh my God, you know? And I have to assume, based on the, like, how poorly they're treated most of the time, you guys, I was most of the time with Guillermo not getting turned and Nandor making promises and not following through, most of the time, what I took that to be, just as much as that Guillermo is sort of like lame and sad and they don't really want him around like that, a big part of me felt like there was some just misunderstandings of time issues with Nandor. And what I mean by that is time passes so quickly for him because he's so old that he doesn't understand how long Guillermo has really been waiting. He can hear Guillermo say it's been 12 years, it's been 13 years, whatever. And to him, it's just not registering. That's like no time at all. And he's not thinking of it in the perspective of what it's like to a human being who only lives 85, 95 years. But now I'm like, was I just as easy to fool, as gullible as Guillermo? Did I give Nandor the benefit of the doubt, thinking he actually meant it, and he meant nothing of the sort? I mean, I'm really bummed if that's the case. Like, I have been believing that he ultimately did intend to turn him. It has just been sort of like, I'll get to it eventually, but I'm enjoying having a fucking servant too much. And now I'm like, oh my God, is it just like understood? Of course you never turn your familiar. Oh my God. You know, I don't know. But anyway, I just feel like I really was not, either it's just the energy of this particular doctor, or, you know, this is the thing. Oh my God. I love when they go into a couple of different rooms and you see vampires like with one of those loops that they use for catching animals and like a spray bottle. And then in another one, he's like got a cone around his head and he's on a table on his hands and knees. I don't know if he's being neutered or what's happening, but it's so upsetting, you guys. I really, really hated it. But eventually she runs into evil Mabel, who's like, yeah, I volunteer here. It's a way of giving back. I mean, who rescued who, right? Oh my God, stop it. And she's doing the thing that all vampires do where they just throw a piece of raw chicken into the cages. I don't know where this they love raw chicken thing has come from, but it needs to stop. And the raw chicken that they're throwing around, I know has to be made out of candy. You know, it's probably made out of some sort of like melted Swedish fish, but it looks too real and it grosses me out so bad. Oh my God. So then we go to Nandor and Colin just trying to use the toilet in one of the what he's going to do. Nandor is telling Colin, ask for a sanitary wipe, then ask when they last cleaned the toilet, and then tell them you're going to take a nice big shit. All of the things like ordinarily would work, right? But unfortunately, once again, things are too interesting. They have come in the middle of an armed robbery. And this dude is so distracted because he sees Colin and recognizes him from TikTok. And he pulls out his phone and it's the jump around music as he's hopping on one foot. And he's in the middle of showing him this video when the clerk comes around the counter with a baseball bat and bashes this guy in the head, making him a hero. And that is when Colin collapses. You guys, I swear to God, this was such a stupid turn of events. I loved this so much. It's just the series of ways that they figured out how to make these ordinary situations interesting. It's so much fun. I really want Colin to be like remembered and recognized. You know, I feel like having it be difficult for him to feed again would be a really interesting wrinkle to add to the situation because it's been pretty easy for him. And if they turned him into a sort of local hero where everybody always wanted to like, you know, find out about the story from him, go up to him and talk to him about it. And he had to do something kind of dramatic in order, almost like the way he did in the campaign episode where, you know, he's trying to hype everybody up because he's attempting to win for just a minute. And then he's like, you know what? I don't want to win. And he just shatters that goodwill by flashing everybody. I feel like we could draw it out a little bit more than that though, and make it like an ongoing sort of interesting thing. But anyway, so back to Nadja, who comes into the room that Guillermo is like strapped to a table, and there are these vampires with the weird sort of cages around their heads. And she doesn't let Guillermo loose. She immediately is like, they told me that you are a fucking vampire. He tries to deny it. And then finally, when she punches him in the face, explains what really happened. And she says, you could have been turned by a legendary vampire, and you gave it away to Derek. And I'm like, look, you could have been turned by a legendary vampire. Could he, though? Like, I don't know. She seems sincere when she says it. So I feel like, I think part of my thing, too, is like, being turned by anybody other than your master. I guess I've been just trusting that means, well, of course they have this because you are going to get turned eventually. So we just see it as really rude. If it's vampires, like, just don't turn their familiars, maybe this is just a way to keep familiars from doing exactly what Guillermo did. But I don't know. She does seem pissed and mystified enough that I can't help but think she really believes that he was eventually going to be turned, even if she does not think that it's a particularly good idea. And I really did think at the end of, like, the previous season, the end of season 3, when he has made a deal to go with Nandor and get turned, I really believed Nandor meant it at that point. So I don't know. So anyway, this dude says, if we release an abomination like that onto the street, I'm going to lose my medical license. And see, this is what I'm saying. An abomination. How is this just supposed to be that this doctor himself is crazy? Or what? Because, like, what's an abomination? All he has said is he's in the process of turning into a vampire. He hasn't said anything about, like, the results aren't working or there's something else going on with his blood. So it was just sort of confusing to me exactly what his hang up was here. But anyway, eventually he's got this, like, syringe that's apparently full of poison that he was going to inject Guillermo with to kill him. And Nadja gets in a fight with him. Guillermo is still strapped down, but he manages to free one hand and use his telekinesis to just pull a bunch of stuff out of the cupboard and knock this guy down. But it is not quite enough. And eventually, Nadja is up against the wall, and he has the tip of this needle in her cheek, which was truly awful to watch. I'm just going to say that even though I know that this is fake, it looked horrible. And finally, he gets up and grabs the fucking syringe and injects it into the doctor's leg and saves Nadja, but she's got a huge puffy cheek because of the poison. And I was just very glad that was the only effect, because yikes, you guys. It's interesting that the kind of poison that would work on a person would also work on that doctor. You really wouldn't think that would be the case, you know? You really would think that, like, whatever it is that they use to put a human down, it's probably not going to affect a vampire, but there it is. So anyway, okay, jumping ahead to when Nandor gets drained to feed Colin Robinson. I love Colin Robinson saying, it kind of hurt at first, but now I sort of like it. What's the purpose of the machine? And Laz is explaining, and he says that I originally built it to combat situational impotence, or whiskey dick, as you might call it. Colin says, that makes sense because I'm getting a little tickle in my pickle. Oh my God. No, thank you. That's an accident. I removed that. It must be the vibrations. Or it could be the smell. I really like the smell of burning hair. And this is when Laszlo turns to see that Nandor is dead. And he's dead in an extremely amusing way, you guys. He's got one hand sort of up and curled and his mouth open with his like teeth. So he looks very much like a dead gerbil, you know, like your guinea pig. Like there's a rodent-esque quality to it that, while so pitiful in an actual dead rodent, in a person is hilarious, is so funny. It's so much more fun than him just going limp like a regular dead body. Curling up like that cracked me up. When the camera turns to him, I was dying. I was not expecting him to look like that. So Laszlo is like, all right, well, I turned the machine off, but I'm thinking maybe it's a little bit too late. And Colin's like, well, can you reverse the process? And when he's like, well, I don't know, he's like, all right, you know what? If I can drain people, I can re-energize them. So, and he comes over to Nandor and decides to tell him some interesting stuff to bring him back. He says, I'm going to tell you my name. I'm going to tell you my real name. It's Arthur Simon Santino. But I had to change it because people would laugh when they realized that the initials spelled out ass. Which brings Nandor back to life. And he just says, ass. Do you know who it was that pointed it out to me? My ex-boyfriend, Davy Crockett, at the Alamo. If you don't believe me, maybe this knife that Jim Bowie gave me will convince you. And he pulls out a knife that says DC plus ASS forever. I love that he's just got this in his pocket. I love it. And like I said, this seems to have been sufficient to wake him up. So Nadja had been screaming for Laszlo. And it turns out what she wants is to just yell at him about the fact that he knew what was up with Guillermo and hadn't told her. And he's saying, I'm trying to find a cure for whatever's going on. And if we're able to do that, then maybe Nandor can turn Gizmo. Nadja is so pissed. She is not taking this the way that Laszlo is. He's, he definitely was, oh my God, he'll kill you. We've got to deal with this. She's much more like, he'll kill you and you fucking deserve it because you fucked up. I can't believe you did something so stupid and so thoughtless. That's what you get. Fuck you. And also says that he'll kill her and Laszlo as well because they knew. But then and then kill himself. He certainly won't. However, he might kill the two of them. I could see being mad enough that he would. Like, if you're going to put it out there that he would kill either and any of them, including Guillermo. I don't know if I believe this dude has it in him at this point, to be honest, but maybe. And she tells Guillermo that she isn't going to lie for him. And is just generally really giving the impression that she's going to throw him under the bus immediately. But then Nandor comes in and he finds, I love Guillermo, they tried to put me down. What? Why? Guillermo is fine. Just your average weak-boned, broken foot familiar. That's that. She just decides to keep the secret anyway. And I enjoy the dynamic coming up of her hating Guillermo even more than usual because she knows this and is pissed. While Laszlo just continues to do these weird experiments and see this as all sort of like an interesting circumstance that doesn't really have like Laszlo is just not worried about it. That's the main thing. Nadja is fully thinking he will find out and it's not going to be a solved problem by then. We're screwed. And Laszlo seems to be much more like, oh, he won't find out before I find out how to undo this. Like, don't worry about it. Like, he genuinely seems to have a lot of faith. I will get a solution eventually. We have managed to make some real strides in other areas. Like, he did make that test for him to fly. He used his sweat to go out into the sun. Like, the shit he's doing, that is really significant, actually. I am really curious if he will now use that sweat on Nadja, if she would even be willing to do it, to go out into the light. But anyway, so yeah, that's going to be a fun dynamic coming up that I'm really looking forward to. But so this is when Nandor says, wait, don't move, and walks up to Guillermo really, really slowly. And it looks like he's like going to touch him, grab his throat, something. And then he grabs out of the air beside him one of those flying frogs with the Guillermo hair on it. And I love this because nobody wants to cop to what the hell it is. And he even points out, like, this even looks like you. Guillermo, do you think I'm an idiot? Because this is precisely what happens when a little birdie sneaks into this house, fucks a mouse, they have a child that grows up, and then fucks a frog that looks like you. This is a direct result of your slacking. I have no idea what the fuck he means. I am assuming he's talking very literally about how Guillermo is not doing his like housework. And so there's just been pests in the house that have like made it and done a thing. I got so confused, you guys. At first I thought he was going to say that like Guillermo fucked a frog and that's why, like, this was bonkers. This was so weird. And Colin himself, he sneaks up and looks at Guillermo and says he may be an idiot. And he says he may have the IQ of a Russian toilet. I don't get this joke. I'm going to be honest. Is it just supposed to be that, like, oh, Russians just shit into holes in the ground? Is that supposed to be it? Because, like, our toilets are not smart. If I was going to call a toilet smart, I would say it was a Japanese toilet because they seem to really enjoy having like gadgets and they have a lot of bidet attachments and whatnot. It's very standard. What is the Russian toilet thing though? I don't know this stereotype. Like, what is happening here? But Colin looks at Guillermo and says, you definitely are up to something. And for a second, Guillermo looks like he's going to tell him. Guillermo's like, if I tell you something, I was ready to strangle him. No, do not tell Colin. Colin is not a guy that keeps a secret. I am so sorry, but the whole thing with him is agitating people so that he can feed off them. What's going to agitate him more than either telling outright or taunting Guillermo constantly that he knows and threatening to tell in order to feed off Guillermo that way? Absolutely do not tell him ever. Thankfully, Colin interrupts and tells him I couldn't give two squirts and walks away. But I could not believe that Guillermo even considered telling him, are you fucking high? Absolutely not. Yeah, no. So, I just really, you guys, I now don't know how long we go before Nandor finds out. And I genuinely do not know what his reaction will be. Of course, I do not think he will kill Guillermo. However, if the writers did have him kill Guillermo, that would be a wild choice. I'll say that. I don't particularly want that. Just because it's surprising does not mean it's good. But who knows? However, the way he finds out is going to be the thing that sort of makes or breaks that episode. I want him to find out because of something that is sort of like intimate. Not, for example, Guillermo doing something accidentally that's really vampire-y. And all of a sudden Nandor's like, wait, how did you do that? Don't want that. That's so easy. And it's too... Honestly, there are so many things that Guillermo could already do that were more than human because of his vampire killer blood. I don't even know what that would look like, and how slowly he's transforming has led me to believe he's never really going to fully be a vampire, really. I have to assume something's in the way. But I do kind of, like, I don't know what I would prefer. And almost would like for Nandor to feel bad about it. Like, if he finds out, it will be in the context of, well, he just really thought you were never going to turn him. He stopped believing you. And him feeling guilty and being like, oh my God, I feel so bad. You know what I mean? I would sort of like it to come from that direction, because Nandor never really feels sorry for almost anything he does. The one thing that we ever saw him genuinely seem regretful of was turning his wife Marwa into Tony, I think was his name. And I think that was the only time he ever even kind of acknowledged. He says, the line he says after that is like, I think maybe what I did was wrong. Probably not, but maybe. So that's like the best we've ever got from Nandor in terms of actually seeming sorry. And I wouldn't be mad if the context for him finding out that Guillermo has been turned by somebody else was you were so shitty to him that he just lost faith in you, and him realizing like how poorly that has gone. I don't know. Oh my God. I forgot about Laszlo seeing the frog in that box that's saying Guillermo's name. It's croaking Guillermo. Excuse me? How? What do we have in store with these frogs? Because I just feel like something's coming and I have no idea what to expect. What are these frogs just going to appear occasionally doing weird shit? I am very down for that. Just saying. All right, I'm going to wrap this up, but thank you guys for coming and hanging out with me. This was such a fun episode. I really enjoyed myself. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.